Welcome back to this channel. Unfortunately, we have an all too familiar disturbing trend to report to you.
A University of Iowa education professor recently wrote an academic journal article explaining how she endeavors to dismantle whiteness in my curriculum, assignments, and pedagogy. Jody Lindley argues that unless her mostly white students are made to confront their privilege, they will be complicit in perpetuating white supremacy. An assistant professor at the University of Iowa has pledged to devote her classes to making her mostly white graduate students aware of their white privilege. Jody Lindley, an education professor at the University of Iowa, detailed her extensive commitment to teaching classes that deconstruct whiteness in an academic journal article published Monday, arguing that to do otherwise would make her complicit in perpetuating white supremacy and white privilege. As a white assistant professor of mostly white graduate students who will become higher education leaders, I work to dismantle whiteness in my curriculum, assignments, and pedagogy, Lindley explains, noting that in addition to her white identity, she also draws on her identities as a queer, able-bodied, cisgender woman with a working-class background to construct her teaching paradigm. Lindley says her commitment to designing classes that fight white privilege began as soon as she became a professor in 2014, at which point she resolved to develop courses that both unveiled and rejected the notion that neutrality and objectivity are realistic and attainable. Such supposedly neutral curricula, Lindley explains, is a type of teaching that fails to take an active stance against racism and other forms of injustice, thereby intrinsically perpetuating hegemonic racism, sexism, classism, ableism, cisgenderism, and heterosexism. Her inspiration came, in part, from attending the inaugural White Privilege Conference 17 years ago, which provided her an ideological springboard for the rest of her work. Since then, Lindley has fought white privilege in numerous ways, such as teaching white fraternity students about white privilege and studying the way white people respond when their privilege is challenged. She offers up 5 strategies other professors can use to deconstruct white privilege in their own classes, such as making sure students know that their views on race will be challenged, interrupting oppression that occurs in classroom settings, and segregating students by race so that they can have more productive dialogues about privilege. For white students, talking about race with an all-white group of peers facilitates their realization that they are race beings, thus revealing their own white ignorance, Lindley asserts as justification for segregating students during some discussions. Teaching mostly white graduate students is as much about teaching them how to learn as it is about the content of the courses I teach. I make explicit to my students what my pedagogical decisions are meant to facilitate, she concludes. Students have agency, and I am firm in my belief that if they can learn how to engage their agency in critical ways, they hold the potential to improve higher education.
University of Iowa education professor Jody Lindley, to put it politely, is completely misguided. This new trend on the regressive left not only blames everything on whites, and particularly men, it also places people into categories based on how they were born rather than what they do. This is the new social justice warrior version of original sin. Since they are now considered a religious cult, they've gone full Jim Jones into the Kool-Aid. You see, in addition to redefining racism to exclude any meaningful use of the word, they have given white folks the SJW equivalent to the mark of Cain. Not only are we guilty of being white racist for denying it, but we are also guilty for acknowledging it. The fact of the matter is we're guilty no matter how you shake it out. This new identity politics we've been witnessing says if you are white, you are not allowed to discuss issues that affect black people even tangentially. But who gets to decide what we are allowed to talk about? Usually it is upper middle class whites from the authoritarian left who decide for black people, who obviously think as one monolithic group. What other whites are allowed to discuss? While we are also criticized for even attempting to discuss issues of race, but are told we cannot, who elected these people to speak for the entire black community? These new race warriors concede that all white people are racist and yet preach to the rest of us, which is akin to a convicted criminal telling us how to live our lives within the limits of the law. Their logic is twisted but seems to make sense to them. They say, I am a bad person, and by acknowledging this, I am now holier than thou and will now judge you. Further, they are not ashamed to say, everything I say is right and everything you think is wrong. I have spent almost an entire lifetime railing against the religious right and their special brand of thought police, but this new breed of SJW cultists would make the most fervent evangelical Christians blush. At one time, I bought into the color blindness view of life. I thought, shouldn't we think of ourselves as one race and one people? Later, I realized that some on the political right were using that same logic to end the goal of achieving justice and equality because, well, we're all the same, so what's the problem? So I abandoned this colorblind notion, but I fear it has come full circle with the regressive left now wielding the color blindness cudgel. Instead of wanting to build on the decades of progress we have made together as people, they want to divide us. Identity politics at its core is splitting us into smaller and smaller tribes. This is not unifying. Thanks to everyone watching this channel and taking a moment to subscribe and like it. Also, check us out on the social media sites listed below in the description. Links to the article that was quoted also in the description. Goodbye.